When we think about God parting the waters, we think about the story that we heard a few weeks ago often, the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and into the freedom of the wilderness, the parting of the Red Sea. But there are at least 4 stories in Scripture of God parting the waters, and today we hear the second story, the story of Joshua leading the people of Israel out of the wilderness, out of wandering and into purpose, out of risk and into reward. Today, Joshua leads the people of God into the land that God has promised them. In all of the stories about God parting water, the people crossing over represents a transition, a crossing over of a threshold, a passing from promise to fulfillment. One of my most favorite terms that I learned in seminary was liminality, a liminal moment, a time of change, a time of uncertainty, a time of pause, moments between the status quo and the game changer. Some examples of liminal moments might be students who have finished all of their coursework but have yet to graduate. They're just waiting for that graduation day. Puberty is a liminal moment. The process of buying or selling a home. Waiting for an employer to call you back after an interview. The entire process of pregnancy and birth, and for that matter, raising a child. For that matter, the whole process of being born and living and dying is liminality. One transition after another. Because that is what our lives are. Our lives are a continual journey. You might think that there are constants in your life. But in reality, everything comes and goes. Your only constants are you and God. In all of our transitions, in all of our changes, the constant is God. In the Scripture, God is present in the transition of the people of Israel from slavery to freedom, from promise to fulfillment, from wandering to home. And it is in times when everything is up in the air, when everything is in chaos, when the sure footing that you thought you knew was there turns to shifting sand. It is in these times that noticing the presence of God is really helpful in the right now. Today in Scripture, the ark is being carried into the parted waters of the River Jordan. The ark carries the blessings that God had given to the people and the promises that God would fulfill. In a way, the ark is a physical representation of the presence of God, carried before the congregation, through the transition, through the wilderness, and into the promised land. And Jesus says that the people of God, Joshua, that was a good slip because Joshua is actually the Hebrew word for Jesus, Joshua says that the people of God were very aware of God's presence in the world. Very aware of God's presence in their crossing over the Jordan River. When we, as the people of God, recognize the presence of God in and among us and around us, when we hold up God's promises in our lives and we follow them, we are changed. Not just as individuals, but also as church. And this story shows us that the presence of God is so amazing that even an entire nation can be transformed. And there is a whole nother sermon there. God can transform an entire nation. But I'm going to leave that nugget with you this week and keep talking about Joshua. So here we are at the banks of the Jordan River, the same river where the prophet John the Baptist began his ministry, or will begin his ministry. The same river where John will baptize Jesus. And part of the symbolism of John's baptism is a political protest, a physical reenactment of the people's crossing over of the Jordan River, of God inviting them to overtake the promised land. Because in John's time, the promised land is occupied by the Roman Empire. And through the protest of baptism, John and the people who were baptized were telling the Roman Empire that people were no longer subjects of the Roman Empire. Can you imagine that? Baptism as a protest against injustice and oppression. Now that I've completely distracted myself from the idea that God can literally transform an entire nation, I need to go back to the topic of liminality. Our worship is a time of transition. It is a crossing over from our workaday life into a focusing on the presence of God. All of the aspects of our worship, from offering to singing to hearing scripture to communion to prayer, all of these things help us leave our everyday lives behind for a moment and come into the presence of God. When we gather around the table, I believe that we are in the most liminal moment of all. I often say at the table, we gather here with the saints in all times and in all places. And we all feel that in different ways. For some, memories of elders or deacons echo in our minds. For others, this crossing over time is so profound that it really does feel like we are smudging the boundary between this life and the next. For others, the meal that we share at this table is a foretaste of the wedding feast in heaven. You know, a foretaste, like when you're planning a wedding and you get to taste the cake beforehand as a sample. That is what a foretaste is. You're not there yet, but you get to know how very good it is going to be, and it motivates you. And beyond a foretaste, I dare say, some of us spend a moment in heaven around the table. And for me, that moment of heaven breaking through and touching us here is what gets me through the wilderness wandering of the next week. And of course, North Christian is in an incredibly liminal time right now. I cannot express to you how proud I am of you. You are exceptional. And what I mean by exceptional is this. You are a church that beats the odds. When I hear somebody say that their church is bringing in a consultant, I roll my eyes because I know what happens when a consultant comes in. You spend a lot of money and a lot of time to get a diagnosis and an action plan. And a staggering amount of time. When a church calls in a consultant, that diagnosis and action plan gets read, and there's a whole lot of talk about it. And then people realize that it's going to be a whole lot of work and too much change, and they never quite get around to doing that work. And then one day somebody finds the report, it resurfaces, and everybody's ashamed that the church spent so much time and so much money having that consultant come in. And so they stuff the report in the back of a drawer in the office because it's too hard to face the truth. But all that is past. All that is past. You are daring to cross the river. You have committed to coming together to enter the promised land, putting aside your own druthers and doing a whole lot of work. And I have to admit, despite being told and despite knowing in my head that we are doing the right thing, I have been really nervous the last 2 months about lots of things. And I've been nervous before about lots of things. Like, if you had told me 3 weeks ago that today we would have an office, let alone that most of the things that we are going to be taking with us on our journey are there today, I would have been a little unsure as to the reality of that statement. But it's true. It even looks good. And this got done because you wanted it to get done. It took time and money and hard work from many of you, and it hurt. And you did it. God is present in this journey. God is love. Ellen said to me yesterday, she said, I can't believe how happy everyone is who was moving boxes. And I mean, it's not fun, but everybody was laughing together. There was hope, and there was joy, and there was a realization, I think a corporate realization that we are actually doing this. And we will survive. Love is certainly present in this journey. And as long as we continue to treat each other with this love that we are sharing right now with God's love, we will feel God's presence. This is a church where love happens. We are a small church following a gigantic God. And if we follow God, we will be in God's presence. God is doing wonderful things through you.